11 of the world's best long-range shooters had taken the 4,000-meter line. 11 had missed. The big board above the firing complex showed a clean column of red, miss after miss after miss, and the wind out past the third ridge kept switching like it had a grudge. Ezra Doyle stood at the front of the line with a clipboard he no longer needed. He was the master of the match, and he had run out of patience for the impossible. "Anyone here," he said, loud enough to carry, "actually know how to read wind at 4,000? It was not a question. It was a closing argument. A few of the elite team shooters laughed, the easy laugh of men who had already decided the target could not be beaten and wanted company in that decision. That was when a woman stood up from the back bench. She was not tall. She did not hurry. She held a small, dirt-stained card in one hand, the kind of thing nobody at that level still carried. Half the room recognized her only as the quiet entry who had drifted through 6 days of competition without a single highlight. The laughter changed shape. It got smaller. Look at her hands, not the room. They were perfectly still. Doyle let the laughter run because laughter was working for him. "And you are?" he said. "Catlin." She did not add a rank, a team, a sponsor, just the name, Ren Catlin. Somebody on the elite bench muttered that they did not remember a Catlin on any of the boards that mattered, and he was right. She had finished the week in the gray middle, never high enough to watch, never low enough to cut. Forgettable on paper, the room had spent 6 days proving it could forget her. She walked to the spotting scope nobody was using anymore and looked down range for a long time, not at the target, at the grass, at the heat shimmer off the rock past the second ridge, at a thin ribbon of dust lifting off the canyon rim and folding back on itself. "Your last 3 shooters held for a left-to-right value," she said. "Full value. Steady." Doyle's smile held. "That is what the flags say." "The flags are lying to you." She straightened. "At the firing line, yes, left to right. But the bullet does not live at the firing line. It lives out there." She tipped her chin at the ridge. "And out there, past the second rise, the canyon pulls the air back the other way. Your wind reverses at the about 2,600 meters. Everyone here has been correcting for a wind that quits halfway and turns around." For a moment, nobody spoke. 2 of the elite shooters glanced at each other, the specific glance of men who had just heard the exact thing they had been feeling and refusing to say. Doyle's smile thinned. "That is a bold read from someone who has not put a round downrange all week?" "You asked who could read it." She held up the dirt-stained card. "I read it." A senior officer near the observation tent, gray at the temples, in plain field dress, set down his coffee and did not pick it back up. That small motion was the first thing all day that mattered more than the scoreboard. Doyle did what proud men do when a room starts to drift away from them. He doubled the bet. "Fine," he said. And now he was performing for the elite bench, for the cameras, for the Pentagon table he knew was watching. "You read it on paper. Reading is cheap out here. Everyone reads, almost nobody hits." He gestured at the column of red. 11 of the best shooters alive just failed that target. So let's not pretend a win card makes you one of them. A few laughs came back, but they were nervous now, hedged. "If you are so sure the wind turns at 2,600, Doyle went on, then you will not mind taking the line yourself. 1 shot, same target, same conditions that just embarrassed the entire field." He spread his hands wide, generous as a man offering someone a long fall, unless the card only works when there is nothing riding on it. You already know the moment respect should have started in a story like this. So tell me, watching her stand there, at what exact point would you have stopped laughing? Put it in the comments before the shot. Ren Catlin looked at the red column, then at Doyle, then longer than at either, at the ridge. 1 shot. she said. She did not sound nervous. She sounded like someone agreeing to a thing she had already done 1,000 times. In places with no scoreboards and no crowds, only weather and consequences. Doyle had wanted a spectacle. He had just guaranteed himself one. He simply had not yet understood whose. The range officer cleared the line for her, and the silence that followed was not respect yet. It was appetite. A room full of people who had been bored by their own failure now had something to watch, and a good number of them wanted to watch her miss. She set up without ceremony. The rifle was a Barrett M82, heavy, scarred, not new. She did not adjust it the way the elite shooters had, with the small theatrical care of men who knew a camera was on them. She handled it the way a carpenter handles a hammer he has owned for 20 years. Doyle wanted to fill the silence. "Take your time," he said, meaning the opposite. She did not answer. She was already gone. Not from the room, but into it differently than anyone else there. I have watched a lot of people perform confidence. This was not that. Confidence is loud because it is asking the room to believe. What she had did not ask the room for anything. It had been earned somewhere the room had never been, and it did not need an audience to exist. She dialed her elevation. Then she stopped, lifted her head, and watched the canyon for almost a full minute while the crowd grew restless. Out past the second ridge, the dust ribbon she had pointed to lifted again, folded, and reversed. Right on cue. A few of the elite shooters saw it too and went very quiet. "The mirage just turned," she said to no one. "Sooner than last hour. It's building." Then she came off the rifle entirely and waited, and the restlessness in the crowd curdled into confusion. 11 men had rushed that target. She was the first person all day to refuse to. That refusal was louder than any shot. The senior officer in plain field dress had moved. He had crossed from the observation tent to the edge of the firing complex, close enough now to see her hands, close enough that the match staff straightened, without quite knowing why. The patch on his chest said nothing. The way 3 different officials found reasons to glance at him said everything. Colonel Hale did not announce himself. Men at his level rarely had to. He simply stood where he could see both the shooter and the scoreboard, and the people who knew who he was understood that the morning had quietly stopped being a competition and become a record. "Who cleared her to the line?" someone from the Pentagon table asked, low. "Doyle did," another answered, "on a dare." Hale heard both. He said nothing, but he took out a small notebook and he wrote something down, and Doyle, who missed very little when his own reputation was in the room, saw him do it. For the first time that day, the master of the match looked less like a man running a test and more like a man being graded on one. While she waited for the wind to declare itself, the wind card sat on the mat beside her, and it told a longer story than the scoreboard ever could. It was not a competition tool. It was filthy at the edges, the cardboard soft from years of being folded into a coat pocket. The ink in 3 different colors and 4 different hands of handwriting, her own, at different ages. There were notes on it that had nothing to do with a flat, established range. Canyon eddies, updraft off sun-baked rock at altitude, the way cold air slides downhill at dawn and lies to you about its speed, corrections for shooting across a gorge when the far wall throws the wind back at you. Nobody learns that on a flat range. You learn it in country that does not forgive over years alone with no scoreboard and no second chances, because in that country a misdeed does not cost you a red mark. It costs you the animal, the rescue, the daylight, sometimes more. Ren Catlin had not come up through the elite circuit. She had come up through terrain, high country, hard weather, the kind of mountain wind that changes its mind 3 times between you and what you are aiming at. The flat 4,000-meter target that had humiliated the best shooters in the world was, to her, a simpler problem than a Tuesday at home. If this is hitting you the way it hit me, the quiet one carrying 20 years of mountains in a folded card, then back this channel in the pinned comment so the next story like hers gets made. She had not told any of them that. They had not asked. They had spent 6 days deciding what she was. They were about to learn how wrong a room can be. She came back down onto the rifle, not because the crowd was restless, because the wind had finally told her the truth and she had decided to believe it before it changed its mind again. The complex went quiet in a way it had not all week, not the polite quiet of waiting, the held breath quiet of a room that has just realized it might be about to watch something it cannot explain afterward. The range officer raised a hand. Cleared, hot line. Wren Catlin settled her cheek to the stock, and everything theatrical drained out of the scene. No camera awareness, no glance at Doyle, no look at the Pentagon table. The room she had been ignored in for 6 days simply stopped existing for her. There was the rifle, there was the ridge, there was the dust ribbon out past 2,600 meters, lifting and folding and turning the air back on itself, exactly where she had said it would. That was all there was. She made her last correction out loud, almost to herself, and a few people close enough to hear it would repeat it for years. Left to right at the line, reverses past the second ridge, net hold, 3/4 of a mil, right edge of the plate. A pause. It builds at the top of the minute. I'm shooting in the lull. Doyle, to his credit or his ruin, said nothing now. He had stopped performing. Somewhere in the last 10 minutes, the master of the match had understood that he was no longer the most authoritative person on his own firing line, and the understanding sat on his face like a sunburn. I will say something plainly because I think it is the center of this whole thing. The insult was never really about whether a woman could make the shot. It was the certainty behind the insult, the easy 6-day certainty that they already knew everything she was, just by looking. That kind of certainty does not survive contact with someone who learned their craft, where it actually costs something. She breathed out halfway and held. Her finger took up the slack, and the entire 4,000-meter complex, 11 failures deep, leaned toward one quiet woman, and the lull she was waiting for, the wind out at the top of the minute, did exactly what she had promised it would. It built. The dust ribbon climbed and bent hard. She did not shoot. A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. She had been on the trigger. She had let it go. Doyle almost said something. Almost. One of the elite shooters put a hand on his arm without looking at him, the way you stop a man from walking into a closing door, because the ones who truly understood the shot had finally caught up to her. They saw what she was doing. She was not hesitating. She was waiting out the gust, sitting inside the violence of it, refusing the shot the wind wanted her to take and holding for the one single still pocket she knew was coming behind it. 3 seconds. 4. The longest 4 seconds the complex had ever held. Then the ribbon dropped. The air past the second ridge went slack for one breath. The lull. She broke the shot. There was no flinch in it, no drama, just the heavy bark of the M82, and a half second where the whole complex forgot how to breathe. The round left at the start of the lull and crossed 4,000 meters of switching, lying, canyon-fed air. Air that had beaten 11 of the best shooters alive, riding the one correction nobody else on that line had been willing to trust. For a long moment, nothing. 4,000 meters is far enough that the truth arrives late. The bullet was already there before the sound of it ever could be, and the crowd hung in that gap with their eyes locked on the distant plate and on the scoreboard, on the spotter's screen. Then the spotter's voice came over the line and it cracked on the word, "Impact! Center! Center plate!" The screen flashed it a half-second behind him. A clean hit. Dead center of a target that 90 minutes of red had just proven could not be hit at all. For one heartbeat, the complex was silent. Then it came apart. Not into cheering, not yet, into noise. Disbelief, swearing, two of the elite shooters on their feet, a Pentagon staffer half standing with a hand pressed flat to the table. The sound a room makes when the thing it was certain about turns out to be exactly backward. Ren Catlin came off the rifle, sat up, and reached for the dirt-stained card. She did not look at the target. She did not look at the scoreboard. She looked at Doyle. Doyle did not have a face for this. He had a face for being right and a face for running a room, and he had been wearing one or the other for days. Neither one fit anymore. He stood at the front of his own firing line with the clipboard hanging from his hand, and watched a woman he had dared into failure put around through the center of the impossible, the hierarchy of that complex recalculated in real time. You could almost watch it happen, person by person, the elite shooters first, because they understood best exactly how hard the thing she had just done was, and the spectators a beat behind them, and Doyle, last of all, because he had the most invested in it not being true. I have watched silence win more arguments than shouting ever did. This was that kind of silence. Nobody needed to humiliate Doyle. He was doing it to himself, standing very still in front of everyone in the wreckage of his own certainty. Ren Catlin stood, picked up the rifle, and walked it back to the bench she had been ignored on for 6 days. Calm, unhurried, the same way she had walked up. The card went back into her coat pocket. That should have been the end of it. A shot, a record, a quiet woman walking away. It was not, because Colonel Hale had finally decided to speak. "Hold the line." Hale's voice was not loud, but it carried the way certain voices do, the kind that has not needed to be loud in a very long time. The complex stilled. Nobody clears yet. He walked out onto the firing line, into the space Doyle had owned all week, and the master of the match stepped aside without being asked to. That alone told the room everything about who Hale was. That shot gets verified, and it gets logged, Hale said. Officially, distance, conditions, correction, all of it. He looked at the scoreboard, 11 deep in red, and then at the single green line at the bottom, because, unless my eyes are wrong, we just watched a 4,000-meter record fall in a reversing canyon wind that put every favorite in this match on the board in red. A staffer said the number out loud then, the new mark, and a low sound went through the crowd. If you have ever been the most underestimated person in a room and watched everyone find out at once how wrong they were, at that exact feeling, the one in this scene, then keep this channel alive in the pinned comment, but because these are the stories we are here to tell. Hale turned to Ren Catlin. "Miss Catlin, I'd like to see that card." Every head on the firing line turned toward the filthy folded thing in her coat pocket, the tool the entire elite circuit had been too proud to carry. She handed it over without a word. Hale held the card the way you hold something older than it looks. He turned it in the light, and the gray-templed man, who had clearly seen a great many things in his career, went quiet reading it. The 4 colors of ink, the 4 ages of the same handwriting, the notes that had nothing to do with any range in the world. "This isn't a competition card," he said. "No, sir. These are field corrections." He looked up at her. Canyon work, high country, crosswind off a far wall. He named the things on the card the way a man reads a language he did not expect to find this far from home. "Where did you do this kind of shooting?" "Places without a scoreboard," she said. It was not evasion. It was the truest thing anyone had said on that line all day. And Hale, who had spent a career around people who learned their craft where it counted, heard exactly what it meant. He looked at the 11 red lines. He looked at the elite shooters who had laughed 90 minutes ago and were not laughing now. He looked at Doyle, who had asked a room full of the best in the world whether anyone could read wind at 4,000, and had been answered by the one person he had dismissed without ever once watching her shoot. Then, Colonel Hale did the thing that turned a record into a reckoning. He read the card out loud. He did not read all of it. He did not have to. He read the line about the wind reversing past the second ridge, the exact thing she had said before the shot, written in faded ink in her own hand, dated years before this championship existed. He read a correction for shooting across a gorge at altitude in failing light. He read a margin note, small in the oldest of the 4 inks, that simply said, "Trust the lull, not the gust." The complex listened to a woman's entire unseen education being read aloud by a man the Pentagon had sent to watch, and every person there did the same quiet math. This was not luck. This was not a card trick. This was 20 years of work that the best-funded, best-equipped shooting circuit in the world had walked past for 6 straight days because of what she looked like sitting on a back bench. I think the cruelest part of being underestimated is not the insult itself. It is how much of your life the insult ignores. Everything that card represented, the cold mornings, the missed daylight, the country that does not forgive a bad read, all of it had been sitting in that room the whole time, folded in a coat pocket, while the room decided she was nobody. Hale lowered the card. He looked at Doyle directly for the first time. "You asked if anyone here could read wind at 4,000, he said. "One person could. You spent the week making sure she was the last one you'd ask." Doyle had nothing. There was nothing to have. Hale handed the card back to her, and the way he handed it back mattered. Not dismissive, not ceremonial, the way one professional returns a tool to another professional who has earned the room. "That gets logged with the shot," he said. "Your name on both." The match staff was already moving, the record being verified, the cameras that had wanted her failure now hunting for her face. The elite shooters who had laughed came over, one and then another, not to congratulate exactly. Men like that do not always have the words, but to stand near her, which from them was the same thing. One of them just said, 2,600, I felt it turn, I didn't trust it. She nodded. She did not rub it in. She had never needed to. Doyle tried, near the end, to find a version of himself that survived this. He came toward her with something half-formed on his face, an apology or an excuse. It was hard to tell which, and it did not matter. Wren Catlin did not wait to find out which. She picked up the rifle, picked up the card, and walked off the firing line before Doyle finished crossing the distance to her. It was not rudeness. It was something colder and cleaner than that. She had already given that room the only answer it had earned, a single round, dead center, 4,000 meters through a wind it swore could not be read. There was nothing left in his half-formed apology that she needed, and they both knew it. The thanks, the explanation, the late respect arriving on his timetable, she walked out before any of it could land on her. Let it land on the room instead. The room was the one that owed. Behind her, the scoreboard still glowed 11 deep in red, with one green line at the bottom and a new record beside her name. In front of her, the canyon she had read better than anyone alive went on doing what canyons do, indifferent to championships the way it had been her whole life. Colonel Hale watched her go. He did not call her back, but a staffer beside him said quietly that they should find out where a shooter like that came from, and what else she could do, and whether she might be persuaded to teach men who would never have let her sit at their table 6 days ago. Hale almost smiled. "Find her," he said, "but she sets the terms." That was the real reversal, not the shot. The shot was just proof. The reversal was the most powerful man in that complex saying, "She sets the terms about the woman an entire elite circuit had spent a week deciding was nobody." If a story like hers, the quiet one carrying 20 years of mountains in a folded card, finally seen, is the kind of thing you want to keep watching. The pinned comment is where you make sure the next one gets made. They will retell that shot for years. The distance will grow a little each time. The wind will get a little meaner, the way old stories do. But the people who are actually there will all remember the same true detail, the one that never needs exaggerating. She read the lull while everyone else was still fighting the gust, and she was already walking away by the time the room understood what it had just been shown.